They laughed and called me a lowly single mom because I worked with my hands instead of sitting behind a luxury office desk. They never imagined I would be the one to uncover the secret that almost cost my grandmother our family's home. Stay until the end, because every insult they threw at me came back to them in a way none of us saw coming. The day my family called me a lowly single mom, I smiled, thanked them for dinner, and quietly walked out. 3 weeks later, those same people were standing in front of me, desperate for answers they never imagined I possessed. My name is Clara Romanova. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 6 years, I've been raising my 8-year-old son, Nolan, on my own. If you had asked my relatives to describe me, they would have said I was a woman who made bad choices, settled for a mediocre career, and barely kept her life together. None of them actually knew me. They only knew the version of me they had created in their own minds. Every weekday started before sunrise. At 5:30 in the morning, my alarm rang. I prepared breakfast, packed Nolan's lunch, checked his homework one last time, and drove him to school before heading to my first job site. I worked as a licensed property restoration specialist. When storms flooded homes, when electrical fires destroyed living rooms, or when broken pipes ruined entire buildings, I was one of the people insurance companies hired to inspect the damage and determine what could still be saved. It wasn't glamorous. Most days I wore heavy boots, protective gloves, and clothes that smelled like wet drywall, dust, or fresh paint. My relatives thought that meant I had failed in life. I never argued, because every paycheck covered our rent, our groceries, Nolan's school supplies, and the small college savings account I quietly added to every month. That was enough for me. At least I thought it was. Everything changed near the beginning of October. One Monday afternoon, my grandmother called. Her voice sounded cheerful. "Clara, I hope you're coming this Saturday. I wouldn't miss your birthday." She laughed softly. "I expect the whole family will be here. I'll bring Nolan. I can't wait to see him." We talked for another few minutes before hanging up. Grandma Eleanor's birthday gatherings had always been important. Ever since my grandfather passed away nearly 12 years earlier, she insisted that every member of the family gather at the old countryside estate at least once each year. The estate wasn't just a large house. It had belonged to our family for almost 80 years. It sat on several acres of rolling land outside Portland, surrounded by mature oak trees and carefully maintained gardens. Every holiday dinner, every wedding reception, every graduation celebration seemed to happen there. To Grandma, it represented family history. To some relatives, it represented something else. Money. The property had become incredibly valuable over the years as nearby developments expanded. Whenever conversations turned toward inheritance, someone inevitably mentioned how much the estate could someday be worth. Those conversations always made me uncomfortable. Grandma was alive, healthy, independent. Yet certain relatives spoke as if dividing her property were simply a matter of waiting. Saturday arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air. Nolan sat beside me in the car, excited to see his cousins. As we turned onto the long gravel driveway, he smiled. "I want to race Ethan again. You lost last year." "I know. This year I'll win." I laughed. That's the spirit. The estate looked exactly as I remembered. The white exterior had recently been repainted. Fresh flowers lined the entrance. Several expensive vehicles were already parked outside. Luxury SUVs. Sports sedans. A brand new imported convertible. Mine was easily the oldest vehicle in the driveway. I noticed that almost immediately. Apparently, so did everyone else. The front door opened before I even reached the porch. My Aunt Celestine Vaughn stepped outside wearing an elegant cream-colored dress, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Clara, it's been a while." She looked briefly at my car. "I see you're still driving that thing." I smiled politely. "It still gets us where we need to go." "Well," she shrugged. "I suppose reliability matters when upgrades aren't an option." I chose not to respond. Nolan had already disappeared inside looking for his cousins. I followed more slowly. The dining room buzzed with conversation. Relatives I hadn't seen in months greeted each other warmly. My younger brother, Adrian, waved from across the room. My cousin Bianca hugged Grandma. Children ran through the hallway laughing. For a few moments, everything felt normal. Then lunch began. As usual, Grandma sat at the head of the table. She thanked everyone for coming before inviting us to eat. The first 20 minutes passed peacefully. People talked about work, vacations, school, and holiday plans. Then Celestine shifted the conversation. "So, Clara?" She dabbed her lips with a napkin before continuing. "Are you still crawling through moldy basements for a living?" Several relatives chuckled. I kept my expression calm. "I inspect damaged properties. It keeps me busy. It pays well enough." She smiled with practiced sympathy. "I suppose someone has to do those jobs." Another laugh circled the table. Then my cousin Bianca joined in. "It must be difficult raising a child alone while doing physical labor." I honestly couldn't imagine living like that. I looked down at my plate. "I manage." Celestine leaned back comfortably. "Managing isn't exactly succeeding." The room became quieter. She continued, "Anyway, I've always believed people should aim higher." She glanced around the table before speaking louder. "Instead of simply surviving." 5 days after my grandmother's birthday, I walked into a luxury apartment building expecting nothing more than another routine inspection. Instead, I stepped into the first piece of evidence that would completely change how I saw my own family. By Wednesday morning, my supervisor handed me a new assignment. "Downtown Portland," he said while passing me the file. "Luxury condominium. Water damage from a burst supply line." I glanced at the owner's name. Celestine Vaughn. For a second, I wondered if I should ask someone else to take the job. Then I reminded myself that work was work. Professionalism came first. An hour later, I arrived at one of the tallest residential buildings in the city. The lobby looked more like a 5-star hotel than an apartment complex. Marble floors reflected the sunlight pouring through enormous glass windows. A concierge greeted residents by name. Fresh flowers stood in arrangements taller than Nolan. Everything about the building screamed wealth. When the elevator doors opened on the 23rd floor, Celestine was already waiting. She looked annoyed. Not because of the water damage. Because I was the inspector assigned to it. "I wasn't expecting you. I was assigned this morning." She forced a polite smile. "Fine. Let's make this quick." I followed her through the apartment. The place looked exactly how I imagined she lived. Custom furniture. Original artwork. Designer lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. If someone had asked me to estimate its value, I would have guessed several $1,000,000. The damaged area was inside a storage room connected to the laundry space. A flexible water line had ruptured while she was away for 2 days. Several boxes had been soaked. Some drywall needed replacement. The flooring had started to warp. Nothing unusual. I photographed every affected area while recording notes into my tablet. Celestine answered a phone call and stepped into another room. That gave me enough quiet to continue documenting everything carefully. As I lifted one damp storage box to inspect the floor underneath, another box shifted unexpectedly. A thick folder slid off the shelf and landed on the ground. The cover opened when it hit the floor. I wasn't trying to read private documents. My eyes simply landed on the largest words printed across the first page. "Foreclosure review." My heartbeat slowed. The property address beneath the title wasn't this apartment. It was my grandmother's estate. I stared for less than 3 seconds. Long enough to realize exactly what I had seen. "Clara." Celestine's voice came from directly behind me. I looked up immediately. "I'm sorry. This folder fell." She crossed the room much faster than necessary. Without saying another word, she grabbed every document from the floor and pressed them tightly against her chest. Her expression had completely changed. The calm confidence she usually displayed was gone. Instead, I saw something unexpected. Fear. "I'll finish in the living room," I said quietly. She nodded. Neither of us mentioned the folder again. The inspection ended 30 minutes later. She signed my report. I thanked her for her time. As I reached the elevator, she called after me. "Family and business don't always mix." I turned. "I'm aware. I'd appreciate it if today's visit stayed professional." "It will." She smiled again. But this time the smile looked forced. The elevator doors closed. I stood there replaying those 3 seconds over and over in my head. Foreclosure review. Grandma's address.
Why?
Grandma had never mentioned financial problems. She owned the estate outright. Or at least that's what everyone believed. That evening, after Nolan finished his homework and went to bed, I opened my laptop. I wasn't trying to invade anyone's privacy. Public property records existed for a reason. Anyone could search them. I entered the estate's address. The ownership record appeared exactly as expected. My grandmother's name remained on the title. I almost closed the browser. Then I noticed another filing listed several months earlier. Management Authority Registration. I clicked it. The legal language took time to read carefully. Eventually, one detail stood out. A family holding company had been granted management authority over the estate. Managing Director. Celestine Vaughn. I leaned back in my chair. Management authority wasn't ownership. It allowed someone to handle administrative and financial matters connected to the property. But why hadn't Grandma ever mentioned creating a holding company? Why hadn't anyone discussed transferring management responsibilities? The entire arrangement felt strangely secretive. I printed the filing. Then I searched for additional records connected to the holding company. Most of them were routine. Tax registrations, annual reports, business updates. Nothing immediately alarming. Still, something refused to leave my mind. The moving truck, the antiques, the foreclosure folder, the management authority. Individually, none of those details proved wrongdoing. Together, they created a picture that didn't make sense. The following afternoon, I visited Grandma unexpectedly. She welcomed Nolan and me with fresh cookies. Everything looked normal. The estate looked exactly as it always had. After Nolan ran outside to play, I decided to ask a simple question. Grandma, when did you put Aunt Celestine in charge of managing the estate? She looked surprised. What do you mean? The holding company. The management paperwork. Recognition slowly appeared on her face. Oh, that. Celestine said it was just modern bookkeeping. She told me lawyers recommend organizing older properties that way. So you signed? Grandma nodded. There were several documents. I didn't read every page. I trusted her. My stomach tightened. Did anyone else review the paperwork? She frowned. I don't think so. It wasn't anything important. It was just administration. Just administration. That phrase echoed inside my head. Before leaving, I walked through the estate once more. This time I noticed several empty display spaces. A decorative grandfather clock was missing from a hallway. 2 antique chairs no longer stood beside the library fireplace. An old writing desk my grandfather loved had disappeared. Maybe they were being restored. Maybe they had been moved. Or maybe...
No.
I stopped myself. Suspicion wasn't evidence. Driving home, Nolan fell asleep in the back seat. Rain began falling against the windshield. Traffic slowed. My phone buzzed through the car speakers. It was my younger brother, Adrian. I answered. Hey. His tone sounded irritated. What exactly are you asking, Grandma? I asked about the estate. Why? Because something feels off. He sighed loudly. Celestine told us. Told you what? That you're digging around because you're worried about inheritance. I almost laughed. Inheritance? I had never asked for $1. That's ridiculous. Then stop making Grandma anxious. She's old. She doesn't need family drama. Before I could answer, he ended the call. I drove the rest of the way home in silence. By bedtime, one thing had become painfully clear. Someone was already controlling the narrative inside my family. Every question I asked somehow reached Celestine before the day ended. Every concern became proof that I was jealous. Every doubt became another reason to dismiss me, which meant one thing. If I wanted the truth, I would have to find evidence strong enough that no one could laugh it away. The answer wasn't hidden inside my grandmother's house. It was hidden inside a trail of business records that almost nobody in my family knew existed. On Monday morning, I took a personal day from work. I dropped Nolan off at school, grabbed a notebook, and drove straight to the county records office. Everything I planned to review was public information. The challenge wasn't getting access. The challenge was knowing where to look. Elias had given me one direction: follow the debt. For nearly 3 hours, I searched through corporate registrations, financing statements, and property-related filings connected to the holding company that managed my grandmother's estate. Most documents led nowhere. Routine updates, tax filings, annual reports. Then I noticed something unusual. The holding company shared the same registered business address as two limited liability companies I had never heard of: Vaughn Premier Holdings, North Crest Hospitality. Both companies listed Celestine as their managing member. I wrote both names down. Neither company appeared to own real estate directly. Instead, they seemed to exist for investment purposes. That alone wasn't suspicious. What caught my attention came later. Each company had filed notices connected to commercial lending agreements within the last 18 months. I requested copies. The clerk returned nearly 20 minutes later carrying a stack of documents. As I read through them, my stomach tightened. The loans were enormous. Millions of dollars. Luxury renovation projects. High-end vacation rentals. Commercial property acquisitions. Celestine hadn't simply been investing. She had expanded aggressively. Far more aggressively than anyone in the family realized. Most of the loans were secured by her investment companies. But one refinancing agreement looked different. A paragraph near the end referred to additional supporting collateral provided through authorized management of associated family real estate assets. The legal description beneath it matched my grandmother's estate. I read the paragraph 3 more times. Then a fourth. The property title hadn't changed. Grandma still legally owned the estate, but management authority had allowed the estate to become additional security supporting Celestine's refinancing package. If her businesses failed to meet repayment terms, the lender could pursue the collateral rights outlined in the agreement. I immediately called Elias. "I'm looking at something. Read it exactly." I slowly read the paragraph aloud. Several seconds passed before he answered. "That's what I was afraid of." "So, I wasn't imagining this."
"No."
"You found the connection." I lower my voice. "Can she actually do that?" "That depends on exactly what your grandmother signed. If the signatures were obtained through deception or without informed consent, that's a completely different legal issue. But financially, the risk is very real." I thanked him and ended the call. For several minutes, I simply sat there staring at the documents. Everything suddenly connected. The management authority, the secrecy, the missing antiques, the foreclosure review. None of it had been random. Celestine wasn't trying to take ownership of the estate. She was using its value to protect her own collapsing business empire. And if that empire fell, Grandma could lose the home she had lived in for decades. That afternoon, I returned to the estate. This time, I didn't go inside immediately. Instead, I walked toward the storage barn behind the house. The large doors stood partially open. Several shelves that had once displayed antique furniture now sat completely empty. Dust outlines marked where cabinets, tables, and clocks had stood for years. Grandpa's old collection had clearly been reduced. I took photographs, not because they proved theft, because they documented change. As I walked back toward the house, I found Grandma trimming flowers near the garden. She smiled. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to ask something." "Of course." "Do you remember signing paperwork that mentioned loans?" She frowned. "I don't think so." "What exactly did Celestine tell you?" "She said lenders sometimes requested updated management documents for insurance and liability purposes." "Did anyone explain that the estate could support business financing?" Grandma stopped trimming the flowers. She looked genuinely confused.
"No."
"I would never agree to risk this house. I thought everything was administrative." There it was.
Not certainty.
Not proof of fraud. But something equally important. Grandma had no memory of consenting to the actual financial risk. As we walked toward the porch, she suddenly stopped. "Wait, I remember something else." "What?" "About 4 months ago, Celestine asked if she could temporarily remove several antiques." I stared at her. "What reason did she give?" "She said they needed professional restoration before humidity damaged them." "Did they ever come back?" Grandma looked toward the barn. A long silence followed. "I don't think they did." That answer hit harder than I expected. The antiques hadn't disappeared without permission. Permission had been requested, but perhaps not honestly. That evening I organized every document I had collected: public filings, corporate registrations, loan agreements, photographs of the empty storage spaces, copies of management authority records, notes from my conversations with Grandma. Everything went into separate folders. If I confronted Celestine now, she would deny everything. If I went to the rest of the family now, they would dismiss me again. I needed something stronger, something impossible to explain away. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. The next morning, Bianca called me unexpectedly. Her voice sounded cheerful. "Didn't you hear?" "Hear what?" "Celestine scheduled another family meeting this weekend." "For what?" "She says the estate needs one final round of paperwork before next year's renovation plans." My heart skipped. "What paperwork?" "I don't know. She just said everyone should be there, because some documents require witnesses." After hanging up, I immediately called Grandma. "Please don't sign anything." She sounded surprised.
Why?
"I'll explain everything this weekend, but whatever happens, promise me you won't sign a single page until you've read every word." She hesitated, then quietly answered, "I promise." I ended the call and looked down at the thick stack of evidence spread across my dining table. For the first time, I wasn't chasing questions anymore. I had answers. What I didn't know was whether those answers would be enough to stop my aunt before she convinced everyone else to hand her even more control. In 4 days, my entire family would gather again. This time, I wasn't walking into that house alone with suspicions. I was walking in carrying the truth. And the truth had finally become much more dangerous than any lie Celestine had ever told. The meeting began as another family discussion. It ended with every lie my aunt had built over the past year collapsing in front of the people who had trusted her the most. Saturday arrived cold and overcast. As Nolan and I drove toward the estate, I kept glancing at the thick binder resting on the passenger seat. Inside were copies of every document I had collected: public filings, corporate records, loan agreements, photographs,
Notes.
Everything had been organized in chronological order. I wasn't bringing accusations. I was bringing evidence. Before we left home, I had arranged for Nolan to spend the afternoon with my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Hernandez. Whatever happened today, he didn't need to witness it. When I stepped inside the estate, nearly everyone was already there. The atmosphere felt strangely optimistic. Coffee had been served. Fresh pastries sat on the dining table. People chatted casually, completely unaware that this gathering would change our family forever. Celestine greeted everyone with effortless confidence. She wore another tailored cream-colored suit and carried the same leather portfolio I had seen the week before. If she felt nervous, she hid it well. Grandma asked everyone to take a seat. Once the room became quiet, Celestine stood. "Thank you all for coming. As most of you know, I've been helping manage the estate over the past several months." Several relatives nodded proudly. "I've worked closely with accountants, financial planners, and legal advisors. Today is simply the final administrative step." She opened her portfolio and removed several neatly prepared document packets. Nothing complicated, mostly updated authorizations and maintenance approvals. She smiled warmly. "I'll pass these around." The first folder reached my brother Adrian. The second reached Bianca. A third landed in front of Grandma. I watched her place her reading glasses on the table. She remembered her promise. She didn't pick up the pen. Celestine continued speaking. "Once everyone signs the witness acknowledgments, we can move forward with next year's preservation plans." I stood. "No one should sign those documents." The room instantly fell silent. Celestine slowly looked toward me. "We've already discussed this."
No.
"We discussed your explanations. Today we're discussing facts." She folded her arms. "Clara, please don't do this again." I placed my binder on the dining table. The sound echoed through the room. "I'd like everyone to see why." Adrian sighed heavily. "Not again." I ignored him. Instead, I opened the binder to the first section. This is the public filing creating the holding company. I slid copies toward the relatives nearest me. This is the document appointing Celestine as managing director. Several people leaned closer. No one spoke. I turned another page. These are commercial loan filings connected to two companies owned by Celestine. Bianca frowned. I don't understand. You will. I placed the refinancing agreement in the center of the table. This agreement references additional collateral provided through authorized management of associated family real estate. I pointed to the attached legal description. This legal description matches Grandma's estate. Celestine laughed softly. You're misreading legal terminology. Before I could answer, the front door opened. Everyone turned. Elias Mercer walked inside, carrying a slim leather briefcase. Grandma looked confused. Who is this? I answered calmly. This is Elias Mercer. He spent nearly 30 years supervising county property records. I asked him to review everything independently. Celestine's expression changed for the first time. It wasn't anger. It was uncertainty. Elias approached the dining table.
He didn't look at me.
He looked directly at Grandma. I have no connection to your family. I also have no reason to favor anyone in this room. He opened his briefcase. Inside were certified copies of every filing I had already collected. Each carried official county certification stamps. He placed them beside my copies. I verified these records personally. The room remained completely silent. Elias continued. The issue isn't ownership. Your property title remains in your name. The issue is exposure. He pointed to the refinancing agreement. Your estate was presented as supporting collateral during a major refinancing package involving companies controlled by Ms. Vaughn. Grandma looked at Celestine. What does that mean? Elias answered before she could. It means if those business obligations failed under certain conditions, your estate could become subject to lender action outlined in these agreements. Grandma's face lost all color. I never agreed to that. Celestine finally spoke. You signed every document. I trusted you. Grandma's voice shook. I asked what they were. I told you they were management papers. They were. They also carried legal consequences. I didn't understand them. You didn't ask. The room erupted. Bianca pushed her chair back. Wait. You told all of us this was routine. Adrian grabbed the agreement and began reading. His confidence disappeared line by line. You never mentioned business loans. One uncle looked toward Celestine. Were your companies losing money? She hesitated. That single hesitation answered more than words ever could. Elias quietly placed another document onto the table. This is a foreclosure review initiated by the lender. I obtained the certified reference this morning. It was triggered after missed financial performance benchmarks. I recognized the document immediately. It was the same file I had accidentally seen in Celestine's apartment. Only now everyone else was seeing it too. Grandma slowly picked it up. Her hands trembled. She read every page without speaking. No one interrupted. 20 minutes passed in complete silence. Finally, she removed her glasses. She looked directly at Celestine. You risked this house to protect your own businesses. Celestine opened her mouth. Nothing came out. There was nothing left to explain. Every answer was already sitting on the table. Grandma stood. Her voice became stronger than I had heard in years. No one signs anything. She turned toward Adrian. Call my attorney. Then toward Bianca. Collect every document she brought. Finally, she looked at Celestine. Your authority over this estate ends today. For the first time since I had known her, Celestine looked completely powerless. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't arguing. She simply stood there surrounded by evidence that could no longer be dismissed as jealousy, misunderstanding, or family drama. The lies that had protected her for months had survived gossip. They had survived assumptions. They had survived personal attacks against me. They couldn't survive documents. And in that dining room, surrounded by the family that had once laughed at me, the truth finally became louder than the person who had spent the longest pretending to control it. 6 months after my family called me a lowly single mom, My grandmother hugged me with tears in her eyes and whispered something I never thought I would hear. "I was wrong about you." For a long moment, neither of us said anything else. We simply stood together on the front porch of the estate that almost disappeared because the wrong person had been trusted. The days following that family meeting were anything but quiet. Grandma's attorney moved immediately. Every authorization connected to Celestine's management authority was revoked. Formal notices were sent to the lenders involved. Independent legal counsel reviewed every document Grandma had signed over the previous year. At the attorney's recommendation, the estate was placed under temporary legal protection while the paperwork was examined. For the first time in months, no one outside Grandma's legal team had authority to make decisions about the property. That alone brought her enormous relief. The investigation uncovered something none of us had expected. Several signatures had been obtained without complete explanations of their legal consequences. Although Grandma had willingly signed the papers, the evidence strongly suggested she had never been fully informed about how the estate could become connected to Celestine's business obligations. That discovery changed everything. The lenders quickly realized the agreements could become the center of a lengthy legal dispute. Negotiations began almost immediately. Within weeks, the estate was completely removed from every refinancing arrangement. The foreclosure review was officially withdrawn. Grandma's home was finally safe. The missing antiques told another story. Most of them had been transferred into off-site storage facilities arranged through one of Celestine's companies. According to her explanation, they had been temporarily relocated for preservation. The timing, however, raised difficult questions. Once attorneys became involved, every remaining piece was located, documented, and returned to the estate. Watching Grandpa's old writing desk being carried back into the library felt strangely emotional. It wasn't just furniture. It was part of our family's history. A history that had almost been scattered because of someone's ambition. The consequences for Celestine came quickly. Her business partners learned about the refinancing arrangements. Several investors withdrew from projects they had planned together. Banks became far less willing to extend additional credit. Within a few months, she quietly sold her luxury condominium. Then one investment property. Then another. The woman who had spent years measuring success by appearances slowly watched those appearances disappear. Ironically, no court needed to punish her reputation. Her own decisions had already done that. The biggest surprise came from my brother. One evening he knocked on my front door. When I opened it, he stood there holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I figured we should talk. I invited him inside. For several seconds, he stared at the floor. "I owe you an apology." I waited. I believed everything she told us. "I know. I thought you were jealous." "I wasn't. I know that now." He took a deep breath. I should have listened instead of judging. His apology didn't erase everything that had happened. But it mattered. Because it was honest. Over the next few months, other relatives reached out as well. Some apologized directly. Others simply began treating me differently. No more jokes about my job. No more comments about being a single mother. No more quiet looks of pity whenever I entered a room. Respect had finally replaced assumptions. Grandma made another important decision. Instead of allowing one family member to control the estate again, she established a professionally managed family trust. Multiple independent trustees would oversee every major decision. No single relative would ever hold unchecked authority again. Everyone agreed. Even those who had defended Celestine admitted it was the right choice. As for me, life became wonderfully ordinary again. Every morning I still woke before sunrise. I still packed Nolan's lunch. I still inspected damaged homes. I still came home tired. The difference wasn't my career. The difference was how I saw myself. For years I had quietly accepted my family's opinions. I let their judgment define how much space I occupied in family conversations. Not anymore. One Saturday afternoon, Nolan and I visited Grandma. He ran through the gardens chasing butterflies while Grandma and I sat on the front porch watching him laugh. After a while she reached over and squeezed my hand. "When your grandfather was alive, he always said character reveals itself during difficult seasons." She smiled softly. I didn't understand what he meant until recently. I looked toward the gardens. I didn't save the estate alone. You chose to ask questions. When everyone else chose comfort.
She paused.
That made all the difference. I realized she was right. The truth hadn't appeared because I was smarter than everyone else. It appeared because I refused to ignore the small details that didn't make sense. The moving truck, the missing antiques, the folder that accidentally fell onto the floor. Each clue had seemed insignificant on its own. Together, they revealed an entire hidden story. Looking back, I understood something that changed me forever. People often judge worth by appearance. A luxury apartment, an expensive car, a prestigious title, perfect clothes, confident speeches. Those things impressed my family. Meanwhile, they overlooked consistency, responsibility, honesty, quiet work done without applause. Those were the values that actually protected the people we loved. Being a single mother had never made me weak. Working with my hands had never made me less successful. Living within my means had never made me less intelligent. The people who mocked those things simply mistook appearance for strength. In the end, they learned the difference the hardest way possible. As the sun began setting behind the oak trees surrounding the estate, Nolan ran toward us carrying 2 freshly picked apples. Grandma said we can take these home. I smiled. Then we'd better thank her. He wrapped one arm around me while holding the apples with the other. In that simple moment, I realized something. I had spent years trying to earn my family's respect. What truly mattered was earning my son's. And every decision I had made, every difficult question I had asked, every insult I had endured, every step I had taken toward the truth, had shown him something far more valuable than money. It had shown him that integrity is worth protecting, even when standing alone feels impossible. That lesson would stay with him far longer than any inheritance ever could. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of my story. If this journey reminded you that honesty, courage, and persistence will always outlast appearances, I hope you'll support the channel. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment sharing what you would have done in my situation, and subscribe for more powerful stories of family, betrayal, justice, and redemption. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember that the truth has a way of finding its voice, even when everyone else tries to silence it.